LiSTNR production.
Hi, Dan Mullins with you. Big news out of court in Sydney today when Sef Gonzales was granted the right to appeal against his sentence. Gonzales was 23 when he was found guilty of murdering his parents and his sister in 2001. He's always maintained his innocence, and he's been behind bars ever since. Today, the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal granted him the right to appeal because Gonzales successfully argued that he had suffered post-traumatic stress disorder from being sexually assaulted as a child. Former Crime Insider's forensics host Kathryn Fox spoke about Gonzales with Dr. John Kasinathan, a senior forensic, child and adolescent psychiatrist and conjoint associate professor with the Medicine Department of the University of New South Wales. We've put it back in your feed to provide some background and insight into Gonzales and his crimes.
There's a case that I'd actually like to talk about, the case of Sef Gonzales, who was around 18, and he participated in a very heinous number of crimes that involved his family.
Well, he brutally killed his family. He had his parents and his younger sister, Claudine, and their house was in Ryde. At about 4:30 in the afternoon in July 2001, he entered Claudine's bedroom where she was studying. Sef was armed with a baseball bat and with 2 kitchen knives that he'd taken from the kitchen earlier. And what the court later found out that he strangled Claudine's neck and struck her at least 6 separate blows to her head with the bat and stabbed her several times with the knives that he was carrying. And there were 5 major stab wounds to her neck and 2 major stab wounds to her chest and abdomen. And so the cause of her death, which was determined by the coroner, was combined effect of the compression of her neck and the blunt force injuries and abdominal stab wounds. Now, that happened at 4:30. Now, an hour later, his mum arrived home and he attacked her with one of those kitchen knives. And this all played out in the living room or dining room. And he inflicted several stab wounds and cuts to her face, neck, chest, abdomen. Then his dad arrived an hour later at about nearly 7 p.m. and Sef attacked him with one of the knives, multiple stab wounds to his neck, chest, back and abdomen. And one of the stab wounds penetrated his right lung, another penetrated the father's heart, and then another partially severed his spinal cord. And what the pathologist said was there were several defensive wounds that the father, Teddy, had, which suggested a significant struggle. Sef, after killing his family, disposed of all the murder weapons, including the bat he'd used on Claudine, his sister. He got rid of his shoes and clothing because they were covered in blood. He showered, changed his clothes, and at some time during the evening, he spray painted the words "F off Asians" on a wall in the house in an attempt to fool those investigating. The family were actually, they were Australian, but they were Filipino origin. So he put "F off Asians" on the wall. And what he was trying to do was make out that the family had been victims of some sort of hate crime. And what was later found out was that his clothes were found to have some of the paint used in the graffiti scrawl. So there was a lot of circumstantial evidence around this. But after the homicides, he drove to a friend's house, arriving about 8 o'clock. He and his friend, who was called Sam, who was not aware of the homicides, they went into the Sydney CBD and they went to Planet Hollywood and then to a nearby video game arcade. And later in the evening, after dropping his friend off, he returned to the home in Ryde and he called police to say he discovered the bodies of his family on his arrival and that he'd chased off the intruders. He also frantically ran into his neighbour's house and told them that his parents had been shot. So it's a horrible offence. But how he got caught was, I think, equally fascinating because it illustrates the danger of someone that just lies a lot to cover lies and then lies some more. And really, Sef, who was a young person at the time, he would have been about 18, 19, really had a tendency to lie for the sake of lying So in the days following the homicides, he appeared on television asking for the killers to come forward, saying he wanted justice. He offered a reward of $100,000 for any information. He attracted significant sympathy from media at the time. And at the family funeral, he sang a song called One Sweet Day. So what the police started to twig was they started to notice several inconsistencies in Sef Gonzales' accounts. There was no evidence of any intruders. And so they started to think he was the perpetrator. So they were able to disprove his first alibi because they were told of sightings of his car in the family driveway at the time of the homicides. So then Sef Gonzales came up with a second alibi claiming that he'd visited a brothel at the time of the homicides. This was then later proven to be false by the sex worker who he had claimed to be with at the time. He also tried to do all these false trails. So he fabricated an email that implicated a business rival of Teddy's. He also fabricated threatening emails, and he staged an attempted burglary and abduction as well. A few days after the murder, Sef visited the family accountant and inquired about his inheritance. So during the criminal trial, it was alleged that he put a deposit on a $170,000 car, like a Lexus, telling the dealership that he'd be using his inheritance to pay for the car. He traded his parents' cars and pawned his mother's jewellery. He also told his relatives in the Philippines, that he had a brain tumour, and he asked his godmother in the Philippines for $200,000 for surgery that he needed for this alleged brain tumour. So there's a whole series of lies. So the offence happened in July 2001. June 2002, New South Wales police detectives arrested Sef Gonzales and charged him with the 3 counts of murder and also 1 count of threatening product contamination, which I think was alleged poisoning.
Yeah, he bought these, and it was all the receipts were on his email account, these toxic beans. And he apparently looked up how to kill people and make it look like they die over a few days and there's no detectable poison type things. And his mother had been admitted to hospital with severe abdominal cramps before the murders.
Yes.
And they thought maybe she had food poisoning but didn't grow an organism. And he'd actually apparently consumed some of the beans as well, or purportedly consumed some of the beans as well. So it was bizarre. Every single aspect of this seemed bizarre, and then he was courting media attention and in this sort of grandiose style.
I think he actually told people that he was going to get a record deal out of the song that he sang at the funeral itself. But yeah, the court really and his trial unfolded in May 2004, and the evidence really presented that he'd been planning the murders for several months due to his parents threatening to cut him off because of his poor university results. And also they disapproved of his girlfriend, apparently. But what the court heard was that he told numerous lies, not just to family members, to his friends, and also to police regarding his whereabouts. And what the court determined was that the motive for the murders was that he was fearful that due to his poor performance at university, his parents might take away his car and withdraw other privileges that he'd been granted. And he wanted to be the sole beneficiary of his parents' property, which at that time was estimated to be worth $1.5 million, which I suppose, there's inflation since then, isn't there? It's been 20 years. So look, he was found guilty on all charges, all those 4 charges, and sentenced basically the day after his 24th birthday in 2004 to 3 concurrent life sentences without parole for the murders. And I've written down actually what Justice James said regarding this young person. He said, "I consider that the murders show features of very great heinousness." I love judges and the words they use. "And that there are no facts mitigating the objective seriousness of the murders, and hence the murders fall within the worst category of cases of murder at common law." So he is serving his sentence at, I think he was at maximum security when last it was reported in the media.
The judge found his behaviour incredibly heinous. The cold callousness of the violent death, it almost seems delusional, someone sort of with a paranoid delusion or seeing this person's a threat. But then he laid in wait for another hour. He then killed his mother. He then stayed in the same house and they knew that the deaths were at different times because of the temperature of the bodies. 3 bodies were completely different temperatures.
Right.
And that doesn't give you a specific time of death, but it gives you a fair indication that they're not all at the same time. And so to do that is unbelievably callous. And yet he was not found to be mentally ill or delusional. So what sort of a personality? Is that a personality? Is it a mental illness? What is it?
So it's probably, look, Sef Gonzales has presented with, and you've actually illustrated that he's presented with callousness. He lies for the sake of lying. He lies repeatedly. And he also has quite overvalued ideas of his own brilliance and success. And he had a tendency to be rather parasitic, asking, relatives for money, lying and saying sort of brain tumour. His whole offences were about being parasitic. So individuals with that cluster of features, they don't have a mental illness or an illness such as schizophrenia. They have a personality style called psychopathy. And psychopathy has been around since, the beginning of time, and it's been written about in books in history. It's been known with different terms over time. So sociopathy is one that have been used historically. So it's not considered a mental illness, but it is considered a personality style. So it can be very dangerous. And of course, people that don't commit offences but have a personality style that has impersonal sexual relationships, parasitic beliefs of, amazing brilliance, which then ties into narcissism as a personality disorder. So someone can have those but not have the behavioural characteristics of psychopathy. That's what's considered white-collar psychopathy. So people that, have no empathy and can just sack 100 people at Christmas time. It's been said that people have perhaps dated 1 or 2 psychopaths in their life, and, some people would identify, impersonal relationships.
No empathy.
Yeah, no empathy, self-absorbed, parasitic. I know a guy like that. So it does exist. However, when there's a crossover with criminal offending as well, that also ties into psychopathy too, like criminal versatility, and also having multiple offending too can then cross over into the criminal aspects of psychopathy. So Sef Gonzales demonstrates some features of psychopathy. They are not delusional in the sense of mental illness, because he otherwise was incredibly lucid with everything else. There was no real...
And functional.
And functional in a certain way, yeah.
A personality like that, how do they go incarcerated?
Interestingly, studies on psychopathy in custody don't show markedly high rates. So the rate of psychopathy in the community is very low. It sort of sits at around 1 in 1,000. The prevalence of psychopathy in prisons sits kind of around about 1%. And that's a bit of an overestimate, I would think. So the majority of prisoners are not psychopaths, but psychopaths generally respond to external controls. So in prisons, there are a lot of external controls. So they tend to follow the program when they're in.
They don't go for top dog sort of
They can.
Or if you've got a couple in there, do they end up being more ruthless, or are they more of a target?
Depends how they come across. If they tick everyone off, then they're going to become a target. But if they're savvy, they'll keep their head down and just follow the program. Psychopaths are notoriously non-loyal. So they're generally not very successful gang members, or they're not loyal lieutenants because they owe no allegiance.
Once somebody with mental illness has committed a crime like that, what happens with remorse once they've discovered what they've done?
Oh, it can be really terrible for them when their mental illness is treated. and they realise that they've committed an offence due to something that was a false belief or a false sensation. A lot of adolescents that commit crimes in the midst of psychosis, they're usually experiencing psychosis for the first time, and so they've never had the experience of it being treated before. So someone might get command hallucinations telling them you got to kill your mum because otherwise everyone else is going to die. But this voice that they're hearing, they've never had the experience of taking a medication and that symptom going away. So they think they believe it's real, and it's as real as the voice that you're hearing now. They hear it coming from outside their head, or it might even be from inside their head, and it is so scary for them. And so they act on it, and when they're initially caught, they still believe what they heard or what they believed at the time. But then when we treat young people with psychosis who've done that, once they start to respond, it can be a really big thing for them to realise, hang on, so I killed this person that actually did care for me because of this illness that now I'm getting treatment for. That's a full-on thing.
Look, this has been just so incredibly informative. So thank you, John, so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
That was former Crime Insiders forensics host Kathryn Fox and her chat with Dr. John Kasinathan, a senior forensic child and adolescent psychiatrist at the University of New South Wales. I'm Dan Mullins, with sound designed by Niall Fernandez. This series was recorded and produced on Gadigal land.